increase, right? Do you have the exact number?
What? Oh no, it's new.
But it makes it much more profitable to grow cotton. Okay? Here's an idea. 1820, the green dots, cotton production, right? It's pretty sparse. You have a lot of it in Georgia and South Carolina, peppered in Virginia, North Carolina, right? A little bit here in Mississippi. 20 years, look at those red dots. And by 1860, okay, we're right at the precipice of the Civil War. I mean, it's all over the place. And each dot represents 2,000 barrels. This is a big business, guys. This graphic kind of illustrates the whole development. So by the late 1700s, profits are growing from tobacco, rise in sugarcane and cotton are moderately declining. The invention of the cotton gin allows workers to clean 50 pounds of cotton a day. I said 20, so I was wrong. Cotton becomes the South's most lucrative crop. Growers expand their holdings and plant more cotton. More land under their cultivation increases the demand for slaves. One of the problems is, 1808, the United States bans the importation of slaves from Africa. So what effect is this going to have? You want more slaves, right?
So the slave holders had sexual relations with the women?
Yes. This is actually very, we know that they had sexual relations, but some of them would do it just to produce more slaves.
And so they had like free slaves, and they didn't even need the slaves coming from outside the country.
They keep producing their own. They encourage women to have children. They encourage them sometimes by raping them. And the price of a slave actually increased tremendously, right? Their value increased tremendously. You can look at the numbers here. In 1800, there's less than 1 million slaves in the United States. 1851, you got 3.2. It's quite a bit, right? Now, how does this affect Southern society? What word best describes Southern society in the early 19th century? It's agricultural. It's very hierarchical. Very, very distinct social classes. You have that in the North too, where you have kind of the factory owners and laborers. But there's a much larger middle class in the North than there is in the South. Look at this. 8% own 5 or more slaves. 8% more, 1 to 4. 50% of the total population, whites who own no slaves who are poor. They're yeoman farmers. We talked about that. Small and independent farmers. Then 2% free African former slaves, or free blacks. 32% are enslaved. So the majority of Southern society is whom?
White.
Yeah, poor white farmers. And this is going to be interesting, the dynamics between these poor white farmers and the black slaves. Because in many cases, the poor white farmers, they live, worse than some slaves, or as bad as some slaves. Some live better. But they always kind of see themselves as superior to the blacks, of course, because they're free versus being slaves. And the people at the top of society, that 8% who are the plantation owners, they use the white poor majority, they manipulate them, right? You understand?
For what?
They kind of create, to get some political support. Because these guys are going to fight in the Civil War as well. A lot of these guys are going to fight and die to save an institution that they actually don't benefit from. You understand? Because they don't own slaves themselves. Half of the whole population is poor whites. They don't own slaves. Why? They're manipulated, right? And there's this idea: I'm a poor white, but I'm not a slave. At least I'm not, N-word. It's kind of, and you're going to see this up into the 1960s. Some of the most kind of just racist and horrible people in the South are actually members of this group. Where some members of this group are actually a lot more, not open-minded, but generous in their treatment of black slaves. You understand? The ones that are actually always in contact with them, that own them, right? It's an interesting kind of dynamic, Southern society. And then, of course, here this illustrates quite well poor whites, poor white children, right? And in some cases, you'd have poor whites in this 50%. They would work with slaves on the plantation, only they were getting paid very, very little, right? But these guys, they're not guaranteed anything, right? Slaves at least have a place to live, food, right? They have their guaranteed kind of your basic needs, okay? The way it's going to evolve, they're both the North and the South are going to become dependent on one another. It's interesting. you know, though they're different and they develop very differently economically, they're going to be dependent on this cotton industry because it's going to become kind of the backbone of the American economy because the cotton's going to be produced in the South, shipped up to the North, railroads, canals, steamboats, right? And then processed in the North and turned into textile mills and turned into big money, right? So they, even though they're kind of developed very, very differently from one another, they have their stake in the same industry. It's going to become the biggest industry in the United States. Yeah.
It was said in the reading that there was a high demand of cotton in Europe too.
Yeah, England and France, specifically England.
So they started like exporting the cotton to both in England and Europe
Yeah.
and to the north.
Yes. England, because they start the Industrial Revolution, they have the most developed, we call it a textile industry at this time. So they actually are going to they're going to import most of this cotton. The majority is actually going to Europe. Okay, and then the second greatest buyer of the southern cotton is the northern factories, right? And actually, when we get to the Civil War, this is kind of one of the things that the South banks on is England supporting them in the war, and England does not do that, and it really hurts their efforts, right? And the price of cotton also goes down during the Civil War, which just really hurts the southern efforts because they basically are not diversified. The North is going to be, because guys, we talked about all the industry in the North. The North actually has a lot of agriculture too, right? So it's a diversified economy. If the price of wheat goes down, they're still producing manufactured goods to South. Where the South, the price of cotton goes down, you have a depression everywhere because all they want to grow is cotton, cotton, cotton.
They're cotton dependent.
Yeah, they're cotton dependent. They put all their eggs, as they say, in one basket. So if they drop that basket, everything breaks. All right? Lastly, last thing I want to look at. Knowing the differences between the North and South, what problems might arise in the future between the two regions?
Civil War.
Okay, we know that. But why?
There were two economical models competing between them, and
Two economical models competing. Good. Very good. Can you expand on that?
because they were basically two different. It was like having two different countries almost in a single place, because they had so different visions about the world and ideologies and about how to treat workers and the way you're gonna evolve as a nation. That they basically, it was like there was a point where if they couldn't like solve their differences, they were gonna split up, and that happened. And so those differences were so big that they couldn't be like there was no chance of solving them peacefully anymore.
Really fantastic answer. Anybody want to tack onto that? Okay, so we have two contrasting economic models. Nobody else wants to say anything? No? So one relying on slave labor and others relying on free labor. Why might that create a conflict, just that idea alone? Free labor versus slave labor. Think about how that could create an issue between the two sides. What's someone from the north who's an industrialist gonna think about free labor in the south? Say I'm a factory owner in New York City and we produce wax candles.
It's not fair for them to be paying their workers and for the other people.
It's not fair for them to not be paying their workers, right? They have a competitive advantage over me. They have slaves, right? Now, how's the South going to respond to that allegation? Anybody want to guess? I'll give you a Hershey kiss.
They can have slaves too.
No, not that they can have slaves too.
They have immigration.
Well, some people say you have so many immigrants coming to the Northeast, right? You can pay them very low. They're treated worse than slaves. This is one of the common arguments the Southerners make. The fact the slave owners, we give them housing, we give them Christianity, we give them autonomy. They can grow their own gardens. When they're finished with their task on the plantation, they can go out and make money on their own. We treat them better than you treat your laborers in the North. You don't guarantee them anything. You give them a paltry wage of almost nothing and then let them go and live in poverty, right? We actually take care of them. We live with them. We eat at the same dinner table as them in a lot of cases. No, I'm not saying you have to agree with me. This is what they're saying. You guys, as soon as you come back from break, this is going to be one of the first activities we're going to do, is we're going to have an abolitionist debate. So one half of the class, and you'll be assigned, is basically going to be pro-slavery, and the other half is going to be an abolitionist against slavery. And you're going to do some research, and you're going to be surprised by the creative arguments that both sides use. What are you going to say?
Well, another argument that could be like seen there was the thing that maybe the owners of the slaves
Uh-huh.
and the businesses would have failed if with the abolition of slavery, because they would have to pay more money to or pay money to the slaves, and their business would have gone down.
Well, there'll be less profits, right?
Profit that's capital produced.
Less capital produced, less capital to invest. Okay, this is a good answer, certainly. But also they're going to say, you know, we've created this culture of dependency. The blacks are depending on us. We can't let them go. If they get their freedom, they wouldn't know what to do with it.
But that happened. They didn't.
Yes, we're reading the
Well, no, this is true. A lot of them
Frederick
don't.
Douglass.
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass' biography, and he says that one of the reasons why they didn't let them like be educated was because they would feel the need of being free and understand the benefits of doing that.
Absolutely. Well, they don't. You know, there were laws, and we'll talk about this when we look at the institution of slavery in more detail. Black codes, or slave codes, they're called then, where you know it's against the law to teach your slave to read, right? That's danger. It's dangerous, right?
Or for a black man to bring to trial.
Oh yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
actually, Christian congregations in the South promoted the idea that you had the right of owning slaves and treating them as you were treating them because of the fact that God created them as slaves.
Well, we're going to look at that specifically. We're going to look at all the different scripture that deals with slavery in the Bible, because abolitionists, those against slavery, are going to use the Bible to promote their argument that slavery is a abomination, and then people who are for slavery are going to use the same Bible, because there's passages there where you could read them and say it's pretty clear that the Bible supports this institution. So this is, you know, one of the most interesting, I think, kind of not even episodes, but issues that we're going to look at in American history, kind of this development of this argument and the contrast between North and South, and build up to the Civil War. The Civil War itself, once the war begins, we're not going to look in too much detail at actual battles and so forth. It's not very important. But maybe more so the impact, right? The build-up, the event briefly, and then the impact and the effects that the event leaves in society. Because in a lot of ways, some people are still fighting this in their hearts and minds, right? Being a Southerner, my last point, is really interesting because I'm not one. One of my best friends is from Arkansas. And this was a southern state, right? So actually people in his family had slaves many years ago. And he's from a well-to-do family, very educated. And it's funny because, you know, everybody's proud of where they're from. You guys are proud of Costa Rica. But you criticize it yourself. Hold on. When someone else criticizes it, you get offended. Just same as me. I criticize the states when someone else does. I take offense. But the Southerner thing is very interesting because there's a duality to it. There's two sides to it, where they're proud of their ancestors who fought for what they believed in, though they are ashamed of those beliefs, or most of those beliefs. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's a very interesting place. I hope that you guys that haven't been there get a chance to go to places like Savannah, Georgia, or Charleston, South Carolina, and really explore, because it's just remarkable. New Orleans, how beautiful these places are, and the history. You can really get a sense of it. But just don't forget that, you know, proud of their ancestors who fought for what they believed in, but ashamed of most of those beliefs. And they there's like a monkey on their shoulder, right? The reality, we'll see it too when we get there, is once many of these slaves are freed and go to the north, they're treated worse sometimes as free blacks than they were as slaves. It's not like when they all come, well, the ones that migrate north, all the white people in the north are waiting there with their arms extended to give a big hug and a kiss. No, they're ready to string them up by their necks too. It's a very fascinating era. So your homework, guys, I will put it on in about 10 minutes. Study guide for the test. Good class, good discussion. And if you have any final thoughts, questions, All right, bell's gonna ring in about a minute.